We're on Daf Tesvav with Beis, and we're up to Tashma. And we're still trying to analyze whether or not we can prove that Beit Shammai asu k'divrayim with regard to Tsaras Erev. So Tashma, you'll find approximately 20 lines down from the top of the Amud on Daf Tesvav with Beis. Shalu es Rabbi Yoshua. The question was raised to Rabbi Yoshua, Tsaras Habas ma. What's the status of Tsaras Habas? Does she fall for Yibum like Beis Hillel, like Beit Shammai hold, and therefore she needs Yibum or Chalitza? Amar lahem machlokas Beit Shammai Beis Hillel. Okay, fine. Now they ask him another question. Halacha k'direi mi. Amar lahem mipnei ma atem machnisim es roshi ben shnei harim gedolim. Why are you setting me up to come to a conclusion of, between the greats that have debated this issue? I'm not on that level that I can tell you who's right and who's wrong. Ubein shtei machlokos gedolos bein Beit Shammai ubein Beis Hillel. Misyari, I'm afraid to put my head into this machlokes, because if I pass like Beis Hillel, Shema Yerutzu, Gul Golti. In other words, the members of Beit Shammai who come from these mishpachos of Tsaros Erva, if I, again, paskin like Beis Hillel, these are mamzerim. And your rutzitzu, Eskul Golti. It's like they'll, so to speak, figuratively chop off my head. Avalani made lechem one thing I can testify to you. Al shtei mishpachos gedolos shoy b'Yerushalayim mishpachas beis tzvoim mibein achmai mishpachas beis kofai mibein mekoshesh shehem b'nei tsaros umehem kohanim gedolim v'shimchu al gabi mizbeh. In other words, they were the offspring of Tsaras Erva that were married without any chalitza, any yibum, reflecting, of course, a psak halacha like Beis Hillel, that they don't fall for yibum, so there was no need for chalitza. They got married, they had children, and their children became the parents and the forerunners of the Kohanim Gedolim. They served on the Mizbeach. And that seems to indicate clearly that Beit Shammai step aside and the halacha was like Beis Hillel. So Gemara says the following: Iyamar dishlema asu hainu dika amar. Rabbi Yoshua said misyarian. The reason why Rabbi Yoshua, let's say in the next generation, was very inhibited about deciding between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, that's because Beit Shammai were implementing their halacha. They were being miyabim the Tsaras Erva, and Beis Hillel, of course, the other way around. So now, Rabbi Yeshua is saying, if I would agree and paskin like Beit Shammai, then I'm basically setting up these mishpachos as mamzerim, according to Beis Hillel. And I'm afraid to do that. And if, on the other hand, if I paskin like Beis Hillel, then those from Beit Shammai will put me, chop my head off, because I'm talking about parceling their offspring as mamzer. But Beit Shammai never actually implemented their psak. So there was never a yibum in the case of Tsaras Erva. Is in that case, Amai Komer Misyariani? Why would he have to be afraid to take a stand and rule that in such a case there's no need for yibum or chalitza? Tsaras Erva doesn't fall for yibum of a chalitza, and that psak would in fact reflect what Lamaisa was going on, and Beit Shammai was, mashlim themselves. They accepted that reality. Because asu lo asu k'divrayim. So we see clearly that asu k'divrayim. So Gemara says, I'll ask you the following question: Nehi nami di asu. Even if I can prove to you from Rabbi Yeshua that Beit Shammai were implementing their psak and they were allowing and encouraging Yibum in the case of Tzaras Erva. Nevertheless, I still don't understand exactly what Rabbi Yeshua was saying. What did he mean when he said Misyarian? Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, this is a Gemara later on. Ein mamzer ella michayve mises bezdin. There's no mamzeris according to Rabbi Yeshua. He's the most extreme shita lakula with regard to psulei kol. We have one shita Rabbi Akiva that even chayve lavim generate mamzeris. We have another shita which is the shitas chachamim that only chayve creases generate mamzeris. And now we have the most lenient shita Rabbi Yeshua. He goes even further than the chacham. He says even chayve creases is not enough to generate mamzeris. It's only chayve mises bezdin. Now, if a person is born from a marriage of Tzaras Erva through the Yavam, that child is not a mamzer, according to Rabbi Yeshua. Because we're talking about the Isser Veishis Ach in the worst case scenario, which would be Beis Hillel Shita and Tzaras Erva. But the child that's born to a relationship of Chayve Krisus is not a mamzer, because it's not a Chiyuv Mises Bezdin. So what inhibits Rabbi Yeshua to come out of his closet and paskin like Beis Hillel? No one is going to become a mamzer. One second, let me just get this. Sorry, I have a technical thing here. I think we've had this question in the past. Let's just review it. By paskening like Beis Hillel, the Tzaras Erva, will not have chalitza or yibum. Because Beis Hillel maintained that Tzaras Erva doesn't fall for yibum, deriving from litzah. The child of such a marriage will certainly not be a mamzer. I just don't understand, why does the Gemara, even if I assume that also, I'm not exactly sure why. Wait a second, I lost the cheshbon. Give me a minute. Why is it important to quote Rabbi Yeshua's Shita regarding Mises Bezdin? So again, if we would have gone like Beis Shammai, Asu. I think what the Gemara is saying is that Bimonef Shachta wouldn't have been Mamzeris here. If he would have paskin like Beit Shammai, there wouldn't have been Mamzeris from the perspective of Beis Hillel, and vice versa. There wouldn't have been Mamzeris if he passes like Beis Hillel against Beit Shammai. Let's start with the last case. That's even simpler. If we paskin like Beis Hillel, then you have a Yevamot Ashuk, which is an Isa Lav, and there certainly is no Mamzeris. So Beis Hillel would not be looking at Mamzerim coming out of this psak as a result of paskin like Beis Hillel. If we pass like Beit Shammai, then there won't be mamzerim according to Rabbi Yeshua, even if we accept Beis Hillel, because the child of an Ashes Ach Chiyuv Kares relationship is not a mamzer. So whichever way he goes, he's not incurring mamzeris according to the other side. And therefore he had free reign to determine whether we pass like Beis Hillel or Beit Shammai. Well, what was he so afraid of? He's afraid that if he takes this view, then from the other perspective, he's generating mamzeris. That's not so. So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you why he's nervous. Because the hi nami de mamzer lo havi. In other words, the son of this Sarah is not a mamzer, Meaning, if he were to paskin like Beis Hillel, and that means that from Beit Shammai's perspective, the Tsaras Erva needed Yibum or Chalitza, so she's an Yevamot L'Shuk, which we called Chayvei Lavin, but Pogum V'Yahavi, the child would be Mischal L'Kuhuna. Now, how do we know that in a case of a violation of Yevamot L'Shuk, the child would be Pogum L'Kuhuna? So we talk about an almana who gets married to a Kohen Gadol, and the vlad from that marriage is pasal l'kuhuna, what we call a chalol or a chalol. The Torah says lo yechalel zaro b'yama, meaning that if the Kohen Gadol were to marry an almana, he's mechal his zera, and who's ever born from him is a chalal l'kuhuna. Uma almana, now we have the kavachom she'eni surah. Noeg bakol. Right now we're talking about an Isur Kahuna. In fact, it's not even Isur Kahuna. It's a specific Isur to a Kohen Gadol and only to a Kohen Gadol. And regular Kohen Hedge can marry an almana. And nevertheless, b'na pagu, if he violates that Isur, which is a very limited Isur, it only applies to one person on the face of the globe, and yet the Torah says that's machal l'zera, is so, in the case of a tzaras erva, she'isura shava bakol, that the isur of a tzaras erva applies equally to both Yisraelim and Kohen, and how much more so should the ben be pogam l'kuna, should be mischal l'kuna from a bias isur. So therefore, he's very inhibited, Rabbi Yeshua, about paskin like Beis Hillel, because the child of the tsaros, since they would get away with murder, so to speak, they wouldn't have neither chalitza nor yibum. That child is also l'kahuna, is pogum. Now here I have a little bit of a problem, because it seems to me, I'm just sharing my confusion with you, if you don't mind, that a psul of cholol l'kahuna is after because of an Isur kahuna. The Isur kahuna generates chalolos. But in the case of the Yevama, a tzara, Yevama l'shuk, we're not dealing with an Isur kahuna at all. So I don't know if we could derive from a sul cholol in the case of an Isur kahuna any conclusions about what the status of the child is in an Isur bi'alma. That doesn't apply to Kohen. That's what confuses my mind. In any event, getting back to the Gemara's kasha now, they asked Rabbi Yoshua, what's the din of tsaros? Meaning a tsaros erva with God to Yibum. B'kapashatle, and he responded, b'nei tsaros, if they got married to anyone without chalitza, they're ksherim l'kuhuna. So we see clearly that even according to Beit Shammai, the b'nei tsaros, who when they got married to the shuk violated the lav of Yevamot L'Shuk, nevertheless the children are ksherim. They are b'nei chayvei lavin, they are still ksherim. So you're telling me that based on this Kal V'chomer, the children would certainly be p'gumim. Again, Kolshkein shebino shenolad mibias isur zeh. Right. So the Gemara answers, Tarte kaboy mine. There's a little bit of a confusion about the transmission of what questions they asked Rabbi Yeshua and which question he was answering. They really asked him two questions. First, they asked him, Tsaros Mai, what's the status of a Tsaros Erva? And then they asked him, V'yim Tim Tzalomar Tsaros Kebesil, if we're going to pass like Besil, she doesn't need Yimah Chalitza, so she gets married with Shuk, is B'nei Tsaros, the Besil, Beit Shammai Mao, what's the status of the children from this marriage of Yevamot Shuk, according to Beit Shammai? Can they marry Kohanim or not? According to Beit Shammai, these tsaros cannot marry with Shuk without Chalitza. And there's going to be a violation of Otiyam Yesh Tamei Safutzi Zar. So according to that Shita, would the child be born B'mischal L'Kahuna? And here we're talking about a violation of an Isur Lav. So this brisa seems to be independent of the Kal V'chomer that we learned before, because from that Kal V'chomer, we derive the conclusion that if in the case of Almana, which is a low tier, relatively low tier Avera, you generate Chalolos, the Kohen Gadol marries an Almana, then how much more so would you have a Pgam Kahuna, a Schil L'Kahuna, in the case of a more severe violation, namely of an Isa that's Shava Bakol, namely Yevamot Shuk. So the Gemara says, L'may nafkamina. What's nafkamina to this suffix? You're asking what Beit Shammai would decide. The halacha is like Beis Hillel. So why are you analyzing and raising questions according to Beit Shammai? Apparently, there's some other case that, by analogy, would be determined by the answer to the question of Beit Shammai in a case of a Yevamot Shuk that did not have neither Yibum nor Chalitza. And the Gemara answers that even though in this particular suffix, in this unique scenario, there's no nafkamina because we're going to pass like Beis Hillel. That's as far as B'nai Tsaros. But the nafkamina would be lifshot, lemifshat, vlad machzir gushos. We have other cases of a violation of the lav, and we want to know the status of the child. For example, a man divorces his wife, she gets married to someone else. That second husband dies or gives her a get, and now the first husband comes back and remarries her, which is a violation of the lav of Tumah. And now a child is born. What's the status of that child? Is that child psul l'kuna if it's a girl or not? And this suffix is lebeis Hillel, meaning it's not just according to Beit Shammai, but it's even according to Beis Hillel. So we're going to ask a question in the framework of Beit Shammai, not because we accept Beit Shammai, but because it's, by analogy, equal to another case where even Beis Hillel would have to address that case. So if we get the answer according to Beit Shammai, which is an answer in Hilchos Chalolos L'Kahuna, then we can extrapolate from that what would be the vlad of a machzir grushasa, even according to Beis Hillel. So now the Gemara analyzes the two tzadim of the suffix. Ki amrin, when do we say a kal v'chomer? Or maybe mika amrinan, not mi amrinan, mika amrinan. Should we apply the logic of a kal v'chomer? Namely, ma'al one of the kohen gadol she'en isura shav bakol v'na pagum so shasura isura shav bakol. In the case of machzir grushas, everybody's included in that isur, whether you're a Yisrael or a Kohen. You say no din she'e vlad she'e b'na pagum o dil. Now we get to the shluga. What's the refutation? Where's the weak link in this kal v'chomer? O dilma, should we say the bas is not psula l'kuna, the ikol mifrach? Because clearly you can ask the following question: And this would be a perek on the Kalachom. Mal almana shehi atzma mischaleles. In other words, the Torah already established that the almana herself is a chalol. So if she becomes a chalol, then it makes sense that our children should become chalol. We have to see why that logic doesn't apply in the case of a tsaras erva who did not have yibum or chalitza and she married someone from the shuk. Would she be mischalel? That's what we have to analyze. You have the Masifta, so we'll read the Masifta. He says, "V'bias kohen gadol the achar shemeis in eseres af al kohen hedjot." When the kohen gadol dies, she cannot marry kohen hedjot. She came kaimelon to kol isha shenivala v'bias iser kahuna. Oh, finally, iser kahuna nases chalol. Underline those two words, Isurei Kahuna. All right, he has a long footnote here, number Yud Gimel. Maybe we'll see that soon. But first, let's continue here. He says, Neseres Lakuna, Tziricha Zonim Chalol Lo Yikach. So any violation in her body of a Bias Iser Kahuna, she becomes Chalol, she cannot marry a Kohen. V'chein, Imi Bas Kohen. Right, so she's allowed to eat truma as a bas kohen. Truma, but now she becomes a chalola. This is all big gufa. Let's see, atma mischalel. So fichak therefore, shem she atma mischalel lekahuna. If she herself becomes a chalola, and her kedushas kahuna is completely undermined and desecrated as a result of this bia, then certainly the child would inherit that status, that stigma, if you will, of the chalolos, the kuna. Kein zara mischal kuna masha ein ten begushasa shek zero ubitzaras ever shedis l'shuk she ein hein atzman nifsolos l'kuna. Oh man, you have to underline with big profound underline. Achmas bias isulav shenever kain af biton shenolda mi biazu and nifsolos l'kuna. So Tosfos points out the Rashi also the whole thrust here is about Machzir Gushasa Le'inyan Truma. Because Cohen can't marry her because she's a grusha, but the question is whether she goes back to Beis Avia after the get and she can now continue eating Truma. And here we're saying she can continue eating Truma because she's not psula lakuna midin chalola. So I don't see, I'm looking for this punchline here about Hein Atzman, Ein Hein Atzman Nifsolos L'Kuhu. So let's just go through Yud Gimel, maybe by chance that'll help us. I don't know. He says, Makar Adavar, Umimashenemer Bisurei Almana L'Kohen Gadol Lo Yichal Zaro Ima. So in the parasha about Model Kohen Gadol, it says Lichal Zaro Bi'amov. Bi'amov Hainu Ishto. Okay, fine. Litam Abal Bi'amov means Ishto. I don't know. I'm disappointed, but it might be my fault here. Let's see. Hikshu b'tos alo mikol kavachoma oma afle grusha u'zeres atzma. I mean grusha u'zeres atzma yesh lu schal l'grusha. Allah amadu kan geshen search. It's a shame. Oh, there it is. Woo! Finally. I can't say that honestly that Masifta did it the right way pedagogically. You know, you look at a footnote and you're looking for some explanation that's basic, and the first words that you see is Hikshu b'tosos. That's pedagogically not, in my humble opinion, who am I, a healthy way of presenting a clear understanding of the Gemara. But in any event, after the Kasha Tosus, why the Kal Vachomer shouldn't establish that the Machzik B'Shaso herself becomes psula from Bia. Tosus in his answer spills the beans and presents what I consider to be the most important breakthrough and principle in this entire suit. She'ein chalolos ela misurei kahuna. You may recall that before I told you to underline the words misurei kahuna. Now again, we're going to underline those words. But then he adds something else. He says, Dakla inyan sul bina yesh lilmod mikal v'chom. What does that mean? So this is the first of the wide lines in Tosfos. Inyan bina v'adei havi boy lemelif mikal v'chom. Again, why not ask the same? Why not raise the same objection, same pircha, as far as bina is concerned? He says, "Bebir divrei re'ei b'yalkud bi'urim." The question is, sometimes you look in the Yalkud bi'urim, it's like you're inundated so much. Let's see if by chance we can find it. They never tell you exactly on what page it's on. I feel that has to do with editing. I suspect that what he's referring to is Kufchav Beis. Let's see if we get anything out of this. Thank you, Yevamot. Ein it itself kuna mishin, ein hapoel sar etzla meikar. Ein hapoel sar etzla meikar. Ein af floda eno mischal. Oh, let's fast forward to the left column. Ha'im ha'isha isha nifseles michoshes kitia l'zar bisar v'nases halol. Picture with toast lo mikol kavachomer is maxi grushaso is grusha atzma yeshlus halol kuna. Itirtu she'ein halolus ella me'isure kahuna. Okay, then so that those are the words that we in fact underline in note number Yudal. Okay, now he writes the following. Osifu she'af agav sheshaninam lehalon she'isha miskuelas al bias ger amoni umoavi umitzri vadomi vikusi v'cholol v'nosin umamze. Afagav shekol elu enam me'isure kahuna. How would I tell you that there's no chalolos unless the violation was isur kahuna? Here's a whole long list of isurim that generate chalolos, and yet they're not isurim. Says lo mikal b'chomer zeh hinif seles el mikra dechitia leish zar. Lo nemar psul zeh el b'mishu zar etzlo meikar v'lo b'machzik b'shos teretz podem shpirsha. So let's go with the logic here. We have a whole list of bios asuros, and they generate halos, and they're not isuri kuhu. So why not apply the same thing to Yevamot Shuk or to Masechet Yevamot Nises? And he answers that these psulim that we mentioned that are not a result of Isur Kahuna, their status, their Isur and psul is not derived from a kavachomer, but rather from a pasuk kitia leish zar. So who's considered a zar? An Amoni, a Moavi, a Mitzri, an Adomi, a Kusi. A Nosin and Mamzer. Not sure about all of them. That's confusing. That might have come under a different one. Anyway, so what's common to all of these? That's called Ish Zar. So an Ish Zar generates a psul of halolus, despite the fact that there's no Isur Kahuna. We don't need an Isur Kahuna because it's an Ish Zar. And that will not apply to Masechet Yevamot. That's not an Ish Zar. Nor Yevamot Shuk. That's not an Ish Zar. In the next paragraph, he amplifies this by quoting Rebbe Chanan that Ish Zar means someone who's possible as opposed to someone who mitzaratzmo is kosher because he's not allowed to have beer with this woman. There's an Isser vis-a-vis this woman, but he's not excluded by virtue of his psul chalos psul begufa. And then so let's make a note of this. And now let's see if we can go back to our sugya. So now let's summarize the suffix of the Gemara. The Gemara is vacillating about this Kal Vachomer and whether or not, in the case of Yevamot V'Shuk, we have a psul of Chalolos, and we're going to equate that to the case of Machzir Gushasa. The Kal Vachomer itself should lead us to the conclusion that certainly there should be a psul Chalolos in the case of Isur Shabbat Bakol. And the other side of the equation, which is the shlaga to this Kal Vachomer, is that in the case of Almona, he atzma mischaleles. That's because it's a case of Isur Huna. And it makes sense that if he atzma mischaleles, then the vlad is a cholom. Masha Enkein, there's no chilul of chalolos in the case of Machzir Grushaso because she is not considered a zarlo, zar etzlo meikar. Now that we slugged up the Kal Vachomer, we go back to our suffix. We don't know whether the child of this bia is pasul l'kul. So this was the question that was posed to Rabbi Yoshua. In addition to the question of tsaros mai, which is the fundamental issue based on Beit Shammai, they asked him what would be the status of the tsaros erva according to Beis Hillel. I'm sorry. If we paskin halacha like Beis Hillel, what would be the status of the tsaros erva and the child of the tsaros erva according to Beis Shammai? The Amar Lahu, and Rabbi Yeshua responded to the first question, Saros misyariani. I'm afraid to give you a hachras halacha like Beis Hillel because the children of tsaros from Beis Shammai, in a case where there was yibum, are now in. Right. If I give you a hachra that the halach is like Beis Hillel, then the children of those tsaros would be psulim l'kuhud. One second, I'm a little confused. Misyari ani lahashiv ulachriya halacha kebeis Hillel shemi yakumu alai b'nei osan tsaros b'beit Shammai shis yamu me'achar shem nifsalim l'kahuna al pi horasi zu. What does that mean? I don't get it. I mean, we just finished saying that Rabbi Yeshua vacillated about that. But if Solomon Lakunu is based on the Kal Vachomer, he wasn't sure about the viability of the Kal Vachomer. Let's take a look at footnote number Yudzayin. Maybe that'll shed a light. He says, "V'af shemi etzem tshuvaso zu muchach shesover kibeis Hillel shem sover kibeit Shammai lo yilus yari v'lo mishalocha lo ya'osa v'kat present." Ken yesh lahakshos echlo hisyari zu shuyakumolo beis Shammai. Ken yesh lahakshos echlo zu elo shuyakumolo beis Shammai. He used the word Shema here. See that word Shema on top? On the left column, he used the word Shema. Maybe he means that since Rabbi Yeshua himself vacillated at this point, and he's not sure whether this Kal Vachomer is viable, but on the side that the Kal Vachomer is viable, then we're talking about Psul Kahuna. If there's Psul Kahuna from the marriage of an Almona to Kohen Gadol, how much more so from a Yevamot L'Shuk to a person from the Shuk? Because there to the Isra Chav Makol. Now let's see how he responds to the second question on the top of Tezayin. He says, "They sorrows." Now let's go the other way around. The sorrows of Beis Hillel got married to the Shuk without chalitz, but he made lachem sha'af lebeit Shammai sherim hem lekuhuna kemi mishpach shotzaros in Manu Kohen Gadol minuyim nase gam al das beit Shammai. Arei lanu ki ein leposlam b'kal vachomer almona lekohen Gadol. Mishuma pircha murali el. So now all of a sudden he slugs up the Kal Vachomer. It's a little bit confusing here. On the bottom of Tesvavam and Beis, it seems from the response of Rabbi Yeshua that he accepts the Kal Vachomer. or at least he might accept Kavachomer. You know what I think? He's not. Oh, you see the word hisyabu on the top line here at Tesvavam and Beis. Nei osan soros mi beit Shammai hisyabu. What does he mean here when he says me'ach Hashem nifsolim lekuhuna pio razu? I don't get it. We're talking about Mamzeru. Shema yakumu olai b'nei osan soros mi beit Shammai hisyabu. Me'ach Hashem nifsolim lekuhuna pio razu. What do you mean nifsolim lekuhuna? I don't get it. We're talking about mamzerus. This is Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that there's only mamzerus from chayve misa. But it seems that there would be chalolos, a psul kahuna, even in the absence of a psul kahal of mamzerus. But even though we're talking about eno zarmei kara, we're not talking about isuri kahuna. Again, the vlad of an Ashes Ach. You're going to have to say the following, I think, but I may have missed this point, that clearly in the case of Chayve Krisus, although again, according to Rabbi Yeshua, there's no mamzeris, but there certainly is a psul kahuna. Does anybody say that explicitly? Oh yeah. Nehi nami de mamzelo havi, but pagu mia havi. But that was the Kavachomer. Well, maybe he's accepting the Kavachomer, but then it says no. On the Bnei Tsaras of Beis Hillel, that's already Yevamot Shukar, and he made lachem she'af lebeit Shammai ksherim heim lekahuna. Wait a minute, what happened to the what happened to the Kavachomer? You're gonna have to say there's a perich on the Kavachomer. One second. If there's a perich on the Kavachomer, so what's the misyare ani that there's going to be a psul kahuna in the case of Soros mi beit Shammai hisyabu? Why? Because they're pasul kahuna. Shemi yakumu olai neosim tzos hisyabu kim nifsom lekahuna al pi horozu. I don't get it. That should be based on the Kal V'chomer, no? I mean, that he says, Nehi nami de mamzelo havi, hogam lakuna miyahavi. I don't get it. There's a pircha on the Kal V'chomer. That's what it says here on the top side. It says Zayin. There's a pircha on the Kal V'chomer. What was the pircha on the Kal V'chomer? Mali al Monashihi atzma mistalel. Oh, so we have to see, I think, footnote number Tes Zayin. Okay, we're going backwards because I think that's maybe he says Aval Nolad mi bias chayve krisus vadai pogum lekuhuna. The af shalidas Rabbi Yeshua ein mamzel l'chayve krisus. Mikomakom vlad chayve krisus nifsal lakuna mikal. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, the ein lifro. Oh, I'm getting excited. Ein lifro malel monikona koin goloshi yatzim mischaleles. Array af bebias chayve krisus. Isha atzma mischaleles likahuna. Mishum sul zona. Oh, see, that's what we were missing. We were missing one word, the word zona. Until now, we were fatived, we were trying to figure out the psul chalala. And we said that the psul chalala can't be derived from the Kal V'chomer unless he atzma mischaleles. And there's no hi atzma mischaleles because, as we said, it's not zarlo meikara in these cases of tzaras of tzara l'shuk, of Yevamot l'shuk, and machzir gushas. But when we get to mamzeris, in the case of Eishes Ach, which is the yibum of Beit Shammai al liba Beis Hillel, then for sure he atzma mischaleles mishum psul zona. And bias chayve krisus generates a psul zona. Is Mamela, now I understand the Amar Lahu on the bottom here of Tezvav Amid Beis. Rabbi Yeshua responded that when you asked me about Tzoras Harayos, whether Mutaros be Yibum or not, I'm afraid to paskin like Beit Shammai. In other words, I'm afraid of Beis Hillel if I paskin like Beit Shammai, because then we're dealing with a psul kahuna. So that even if l'shitasi there's no psul mamzeres, because we're not talking about chayve mises in the case of an Isra Eishes Ach, but we definitely have a psul of kahuna. So I think when he says nifsolim lekahuna here on the top of Tesvav, the top line here in the Masifta, he's referring to zona. And he's referring back to footnote number Tezayin on the previous page. And now when we move over to Tezayin, and we're talking about the B'nai Tsaros, so now there's no hiatzma mischaleles because we're talking about an Isser Lav without a Chiv Karetz, which means there's no Psul Zona. And then we have the svara of it's not Zar Lo Meikara. So Memela, there's no hiatzma mischaleles, and if there's no hiatzma mischaleles, then we have a pircha on the kavachon from Almana Kohen Gadol. Now, once we accept that pircha, the bottom line is that a lot of machzir gushaso is not pogum l'kahuna. Why? Because what are you going to base it on? There's no Isser Kahuna and Machzir Gushaso. Ella, what? You're going to base it on the Kavachomer. But we rejected the Kavachomer with the Pircha of Hiyatzim Mischalels. There's no Hiyatzim Mischalels in the case of Machzir Gushaso because it's not Zar Lo Meikara. There's a lot of variables here in the equation. You have to juggle them all. So let's just read, if you don't mind, up to Gufa because that'll give us a natural break here. Toshma, Bimei Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus, Hutra Tsaras Habas Li'achet. Again, a proof that Asu Beisila Beit Shammai Kidivreim, that they were matir for Yibum a Tsaras Bas. Ishmamina Asu. It must be that Asu Beisila Beit Shammai Kidivreim. Shmamina. So he writes here, Shekain, he tira Aviv Shel Rabbi Dosa, Shehoya Nitalmidei Beit Shammai. So you see that they accepted the Psak of Rabbi Dosa as a Talmud of Beit Shammai, and they were matir et Tzoras Habas Liyibum. Shmamina asu Beit Shammai kidivreim. Shmamina shekain asu Beit Shammai kidivreim af liach shenifska alocha kevei Hillel. Kachi maskonas haGemara. That's the final bottom line of this Gemara that we've been studying for I don't know how many days. V'nidchu divreim, and the sheet of lo asu is rejected. So here we'll stop with Kufa, and Amir Hashem pick that up on Yom Shlishi.